American natural gas has flooded the European market in the last couple of years and diminished the Russian energy monopoly over the European continent. After Russia fully invaded Ukraine in 2022, most of the European nations cut their ties with Moscow and began to import natural gas from the United States and other countries. In 2023, the Russian state company Gazprom announced its first net loss in 24 years, as it lost its access to the European market and wasn't able to export natural gas elsewhere in enough volumes to cover the losses. In the same year, the United States became the biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world, and it continues to expand its market share at Russia's expense. Since the beginning of the Cold War, Washington and Moscow have been competing for influence in Europe, and natural gas played an important role in that competition. Once the Soviet Union discovered major natural gas reserves in western Siberia in the 1960s, it began to build a network of pipelines that connected the country with other European nations. One of the longest and most important pipelines is called Brotherhood, which passes through Ukraine and at that time delivered gas to Czechoslovakia, Germany, Austria and Italy. There is also a Soyuz pipeline that originates in the south of Russia and connects with the Brotherhood pipeline in the western part of Ukraine. Another important project is the Trans-Balkan pipeline that passes Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey. All of those pipelines helped the Soviet Union to consolidate its control within its satellite states that were part of the Warsaw Pact and also increased influence in European countries that were part of NATO. The Soviet government also offered cheap prices for its natural gas so that other countries became reliant on Moscow for their energy needs. That is why in 1973, after the Arab countries imposed an oil embargo against the Western nations, as a result of the United States providing support to Israel to repel the invasion of Egypt and Syria, the European countries that were part of NATO saw Soviet gas as a means to diversify energy sources away from the OPEC oil. By doing so, Moscow was able to create economic ties that were difficult to break, since any potential disruption of gas supplies would create serious economic consequences for any European country that relied on Soviet gas. That is also why the Soviet Union has gained an opportunity to exploit divisions within NATO to achieve its geopolitical objectives. While in 1991 the Soviet Union lost the Cold War and disintegrated into separate states, the dependencies on natural gas from Siberia were still significant. That is why Moscow maintained its status as a major natural gas supplier to Europe and built several new pipelines to enhance its export capacity. It also used the Soviet playbook of developing economic ties that could be exploited to achieve political goals. In 2005, it commissioned the Blue Stream pipeline that directly connected Russia with Turkey. In 2006, the construction of the Yamal-Europe pipeline that goes through the Belarus and Poland to Germany was also finished. Thanks to the expansion of its network of pipelines, Russia was able to increase the dependence of European nations on its natural gas, which gave it enough leverage to undermine the European way of life. In 2008, in violation of all international norms, Russia invaded Georgia and occupied parts of the country that it continues to hold to this day. In 2009, Russia started a natural gas war against Ukraine to undermine the power of the pro-Ukrainian government and later used the gas crisis to interfere in Ukrainian elections and pave the way to the formation of the pro-Russian government a year later. All this time, the Western nations did not do anything to stop Moscow from fueling the instability on the European continent, as they were too exposed to the imports of natural gas from Russia. In addition to that, Moscow was also making a lot of money from selling its gas to Europe, and it used that money to buy European politicians and extend its influence on the continent even more. In 2011, the construction of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that goes through the Baltic Sea and connects Russia directly with Germany was finished. The pipeline was used as a political instrument to increase Germany's dependency on Russia. Even more so, it was approved in 2005 by the German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who left the government job a few days after signing the approval and became a member of Gazprom's board of directors. As Russia was buying politicians and expanding its influence in Europe, on the other side of the Atlantic, the United States was experiencing a fracking revolution, which made it possible for the country to become energy independent a decade later. At that time, natural gas fields in Pennsylvania, Texas, and Louisiana became the leading production regions in the country, and in 2009, the United States became the biggest producer of natural gas in the world, surpassing Russia. The fracking revolution at that time also made it possible for the United States to develop its LNG industry and expand its LNG export facilities that exported natural gas in liquefied form using ships to other countries. Russia was afraid of this development, as it feared that it could lose its market share over time. That is why it began a campaign to stop the fracking revolution by spreading misinformation, financing questionable environmental groups, and targeting the American energy infrastructure through cyber attacks. While it failed to achieve its goals in the United States, it managed to stop the spread of the fracking revolution in Europe, which continued to rely on supplies from Russia. In 2013, Russia exported almost 180 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe, which represented almost a third of European demand at that time. As European nations failed to properly react to the Russian invasion of Georgia and its gas war against Ukraine, Moscow took it as a sign of weakness and continued to fuel instability on the European continent. In 2014, after the pro-Russian puppet was impeached from the office of the president of Ukraine by the majority of the Ukrainian parliament and democratic elections were announced, Russia decided to undermine the will of the Ukrainian people and invaded the Crimean Peninsula and the eastern part of Ukraine to regain influence in Eastern Europe. Despite this, Germany under Chancellor Angela Merkel did not learn anything from the past mistakes and in 2015 announced a new deal with Russia to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to make the country even more exposed to the supply of Russian natural gas. The good news is that other countries began to slowly diversify their supply of natural gas. Poland and Lithuania became one of the first European countries that built LNG terminals and started importing natural gas from the United States. The United States itself continued to experience a rise in natural gas production, and in addition to exporting more fossil fuels to other countries, natural gas became the primary source of US power generation, with its share increasing from 24% in 2010 to 43% in 2023. The European Commission in Brussels also started to act, and with the help of regulations managed to cancel the construction of the South Stream pipeline in 2014, which was supposed to go through the Black Sea and connect countries like Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, Slovenia, Greece and Italy, and make European countries rely on Russian natural gas even more. Instead, Russia built a Turk Stream pipeline in 2021 that goes through Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia and Hungary. When it comes to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the German government under Angela Merkel for years has been defending the project, and only in 2019 its construction was slowed down because of the American sanctions that were implemented under the first Trump administration and forced Western companies to stop working on the construction of the pipeline. While in 2021, the Biden administration lifted sanctions to improve American relations with Germany, the supplies of American natural gas to Europe continued to increase with each year. Russia understood that it was running out of time to restore its former empire, as it was slowly losing its leverage over the European nations, which were slowly diversifying their supplies of natural gas. That is why in late 2021, the satellite images showed a massive deployment of Russian military units around the Ukrainian border, which signaled that a great war was about to begin on the European continent, and natural gas played an important role in it. As Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, while its missiles began to strike civilian infrastructure, the prices for natural gas on the open market rose to new records. If in March of 2021, the price for natural gas on the open market was under 20 euros per megawatt hour in Europe, then in early March of 2022, the price was over 125 euros per megawatt hour, as there was fear of supply disruptions from Russia. As the war was escalating, Russia began to artificially cut the supply of natural gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to inflict even more pain on European consumers. By the end of August 2022, the prices for natural gas had risen to over 300 euros per megawatt hour. The European nations understood at that point that decades of reliance on Russian natural gas needed to be over, and the European Union began to act. Before the full-scale invasion, Russia was planning on expanding its LNG capabilities and heavily invested in projects in the Yamal and Sakhalin regions. Its strategy of development of the Arctic zone aimed to increase LNG production from 43 million tons in 2024 to 91 million tons in 2035. The problem for Russia was that it relied heavily on Western technology to build and maintain its LNG infrastructure. That is why one of the first things that the European Union did was to impose sanctions against the Russian LNG industry, which made it impossible for Moscow to get access to Western technology. Because of this, in the last 3 years, the Russian annual LNG production did not increase significantly and was only around around 33 million tons, which is already below its own estimates. The United States has also put sanctions on the Russian Arctic LNG 2 project, which later struggled to find customers and ceased its operations a few months ago. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines are also not operational anymore after the underwater explosions in September of 2022 happened underneath the Baltic Sea. At the same time, Gazprom breached its contract with Poland in 2022, after which the Yamal-Europe pipeline is no longer operational as well. In January of 2025, Ukraine also stopped the transit of Russian natural gas to Europe through the Brotherhood pipeline, which made Russia lose even more market share on the European continent. As a result of all of those developments, Russian state company Gazprom reported its first annual net loss in more than 2 decades and became the most unprofitable company in Russia. The report that the company itself has published estimates that Gazprom's annual exports to Europe will average from 50 billion to 75 billion cubic meters by 2035. For comparison, in 2021, Gazprom exported approximately 167 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe. In the meantime, the European Union has been diversifying its supply of natural gas in the last few years. In 2024, the majority of natural gas from pipelines came from Norway and Algeria. At the same time, the United States provided almost half of LNG supplies, which made it possible for natural gas prices to decline to one of the lowest levels in the last 3 years. To offset its losses, Russia began to focus on expanding its presence in the Chinese market. The current Power of Siberia 1 pipeline has delivered 31 billion cubic meters of gas to China in 2024 and is expected to deliver 38 billion cubic meters in 2025, which is its maximum export capacity. But that is not going to be enough to offset the losses from the European market, which received almost 5 times more volume of natural gas from Russia before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The government in Beijing is also hesitant to approve the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline that was supposed to go through Mongolia and double Russia's export capacity to China. Beijing at this point is not interested in increasing its exposure to Russian natural gas like the European nations did in recent decades. While Mongolia last year excluded the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline from its national action plan, which signals a substantial setback for the project. At the same time, as Russia struggles to make profits, the United States is increasing its market share at Russia's expense. In the last 2 years, the United States has become the biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world, followed by Australia and Qatar. The United States is also expanding its presence not only in Europe, but in Asia as well, and it is currently one of the major providers of LNG to China, India, and Japan. In addition to that, the Trump administration recently accelerated the approval of new LNG export terminals, which would increase the presence of American natural gas overseas in the next decade. All of this is happening at a time when Russia cannot expand its capacity and increase its exports because of the Western sanctions. Not only did Russia fail to fully occupy Ukraine, but it also lost the trust of almost all European nations, most of which have recovered from Russian-led disruptions and no longer rely on its natural gas supplies. It took more than half a century for Moscow to create economic ties with Europe that were difficult to break. But thanks to the rapid increase of American natural gas production and Western sanctions, the Russian gas empire is crumbling before our eyes.